sat in the glass-walled conference room, surrounded by executives I'd worked with for 15 years. The vice president, Gerald Morrison, cleared his throat and adjusted his tie, a nervous habit I'd seen 1,000 times before. "Claire, we're restructuring the department. You're being reassigned." The words hung in the air like smoke. Reassigned to what? An intern coordinator role, supporting new leadership. "You'll report to..." He paused as the door opened. His son walked in. Blake Morrison, 25 years old, MBA from his father's alma mater. Zero experience in our industry. He was smirking. Blake pulled out the chair at the head of the table. My chair, where I'd sat during strategy meetings for the past 8 years, and dropped into it casually. "Hey everyone. Looking forward to working with you all." His eyes landed on me. "Especially learning from the people who've been here forever." Gerald continued like this was normal. "Blake will be taking over as Director of Strategy. Effective immediately. My office, my team, my projects. 15 years of building this department from the ground up. Gone in a sentence. The humiliation wasn't accidental. It was calculated. Public. Designed to break me. Effective immediately." I repeated quietly. They walked me back to my office like I was being escorted from the premises. Co-workers suddenly found their computer screens fascinating. Nobody made eye contact. My assistant, whom I'd mentored from an entry-level position, looked away when I passed her desk. Blake followed behind, making comments. "Wow, nice view. I'm going to enjoy this office." He picked up the award on my shelf. Industry Leader of the Year 2021. "Heavy. Guess I'll have room for my own awards soon." Security revoked my keycard access while I packed. I couldn't even get back into the building without being buzzed in now. "Don't take too long," Gerald said from the doorway. "Blake needs to settle in." I carefully packed my personal items. Photos. My degree. The client portfolio I'd built from scratch. Everything that proved I'd built something real here. As I carried my box toward the elevator, I passed the executive lounge. The door was slightly open. 2 board members were talking in low voices. "We can't afford to lose her," one said. "I know. But it's done." Gerald insisted. The elevator doors closed on my old life. But something in me had already shifted. The hurt was transforming into something harder. HR called me in before I left the building. Patricia, the director, looked uncomfortable. "Claire, this is a transition. You can prove yourself again. Work hard in your new role, show dedication, and there might be opportunities down the line." 15 years. Reduced to prove yourself again like I was fresh out of college. What if I don't want to prove myself again? She blinked, surprised. "Then I'd suggest you consider your options carefully. This is a good company. Benefits. Stability." She slid papers across her desk. Demotion agreement. New salary, less than half what I'd been making. New title. Leadership Development Intern. Sign. Not because I accepted it but because I needed time. My phone buzzed as I left HR. An email notification. Subject line. Contract draft, final review. I didn't open it. Not yet. Not where cameras could see my reaction. I cleared my desk without drama. Didn't slam anything. Didn't cry. Didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Gerald watched from Blake's new office. My old office, arms crossed. Satisfied. He thought I was defeated. Thought I'd slink away quietly like the others he'd pushed out over the years. I smiled at him. Polite. Professional. The same smile I'd used in 1,000 client meetings. His satisfaction faltered just slightly. He couldn't quite read me. "Good luck, Claire," he called out. False sincerity dripping from every word. "Thank you, Gerald. I appreciate everything." I meant it differently than he heard it. I walked to the elevator, box in arms. Pressed the button. The doors slid open. Inside, finally alone, I set down the box and pulled out my phone. Opened the email. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From anticipation. The contract was there. Complete. Legal. Legitimate. Everything I'd been building for 3 months, completely separate from this company. My consulting firm. My terms. My future. And the client name at the top made me smile for real this time. The email confirmed what I'd been working toward in secret. Brighton and Associates, my consulting firm. Not a side project. Not a hobby. A fully registered, licensed, legitimate business. I'd spent 3 months building it quietly. Networking after hours. Attending industry events on weekends. Building relationships with people who valued my expertise, not my job title. The contract was real. Binding. A major client ready to pay market rates for strategic consulting. 6 figures for the first engagement alone. But it was the client's name that mattered most. Harman Strategic Partners, the fastest growing firm in our industry. The company my soon-to-be former employer desperately wanted to partner with. The company Gerald had been trying to land for 18 months. And they just signed exclusively with me. The timing wasn't accidental. I'd been planning this exit since I first heard whispers about Blake joining the company. Since I realized Gerald was grooming his son to take over positions that should have been earned. I'd seen the writing on the wall. So I'd built my own wall. I showed up the next morning as required. Intern coordinator. The job had no real responsibilities. Just busy work designed to humiliate me into quitting. I sat in a cubicle near the break room. Could hear every conversation. Every laugh at my expense. But I watched. And I learned. Blake held his first strategy meeting. I wasn't invited, but I could see through the glass walls. He used my presentation framework, the one I'd developed over years. But he didn't understand it. Fumbled the execution. Made promises he couldn't deliver. The clients looked confused. The team looked uncertain. But Gerald applauded afterward. Proud father. Blind to the disaster unfolding. Over the next week, I watched Blake systematically dismantle everything I'd built. Changed processes he didn't understand. Alienated key team members. Made decisions based on ego rather than strategy. One of our biggest clients, Meridian Holdings, requested a strategy review session. They'd been my account for 5 years. Trusted me completely. Blake assigned himself to lead it. I wasn't included. Wasn't even told about it. Blake spent 3 days preparing for the Meridian presentation. He used my old templates, my research, my frameworks, but he changed key elements, improving them without understanding why they worked. I heard him practicing in the conference room. Every sentence made me wince. The morning of the presentation, he sent the deck to Meridian's CEO. Didn't review it carefully. Didn't double-check the data. Within an hour my phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, Meridian's CEO. I'd given him my personal number years ago for emergencies. Claire, what is this presentation? The numbers don't match our objectives. The strategy contradicts what we discussed last month. Is everything okay? I texted back carefully. I'm no longer on your account. Blake Morrison is handling it now. This won't work. We need accuracy. Can we talk? I'm not authorized to discuss client accounts anymore. I'm sorry. The presentation happened anyway. I heard about it from 3 different people. Blake stumbled through questions he couldn't answer. Made promises about deliverables he didn't understand. Contradicted himself multiple times. Meridian's team looked concerned. As to reschedule, Blake assured them everything was fine. Gerald called an emergency leadership meeting. The glass conference room was packed. Blake sat at the head of the table again, looking less confident than before. Meridian expressed concerns about our recent presentation, Gerald said carefully. They're questioning our strategic direction. Blake jumped in. The issue was with the foundational work. Claire's old frameworks were outdated. I tried to modernize them, but there were gaps in the research. Every head turned toward me. I was sitting in the back, technically not part of leadership anymore. But they'd pulled me in because they needed answers. Claire, what's your assessment? Gerald asked, barely concealing his irritation at having to include me. Understood. Walked to the whiteboard. corrected Blake's presentation point by point, explained why each change he'd made contradicted Meridian's business model, showed where his numbers were wrong. I didn't raise my voice, didn't insult him, just presented facts. The room went silent. Blake's face was red. Gerald looked furious, but not at Blake. At me, for exposing his son's incompetence. "Thank you, Claire," Gerald said coldly. "You're dismissed." As I left, I heard him tell Blake, "Don't worry. She's just bitter." That evening, I sat in my small apartment with the consulting contract in front of me. Read every clause again. Made sure I understood the terms completely. This was my exit strategy. My safety net. My validation that I hadn't wasted 15 years building expertise that mattered. Picked up a pen. Signed the final page. Brighton and Associates was officially operational. I was officially a business owner. No longer dependent on Gerald's approval or Blake's incompetence. For the first time in months, I slept peacefully. The industry news hit like a bomb. New federal regulations changing how strategic consulting firms could operate. Requirements for certification. Compliance standards. Reporting procedures. It was exactly what I'd been preparing for. My consulting firm was built specifically to meet these new requirements. I'd seen them coming through my industry contacts months ago. My soon-to-be former employer was completely unprepared. Their current structure didn't meet the new standards. They'd need to restructure entirely. Or hire outside help. I watched the panic unfold in real time. Emergency meetings. Frantic emails. Executives scrambling to understand regulations they'd ignored. Blake tried to lead the response. Failed spectacularly. Couldn't even explain what the regulations required. Sales numbers dropped hard. 3 clients postponed renewals, citing uncertainty about compliance. The board started asking hard questions. Gerald looked stressed for the first time in years. The smug satisfaction was gone, replaced by desperation. "We need a consultant," one board member said in a meeting I overheard. "Someone who specializes in regulatory compliance and strategic realignment." Gerald dismissed it initially. "We can handle this internally." But the numbers kept dropping. And desperation turned to panic. The board meeting was tense. I heard about it from my former assistant, who felt guilty about avoiding me earlier. She'd started quietly feeding me information. "They're talking about bringing in outside help," she told me over coffee. Gerald fought it, but the board overruled him. "They're desperate." Did they mention any specific firms? One board member suggested Brighton and Associates. Said they're new but highly specialized in exactly what we need. Kept my face neutral. Never heard of them. Me neither. But apparently they're already working with Harman Strategic Partners. That impressed everyone. Gerald must have been furious. Harman was his white whale. The partnership he'd been chasing for over a year. And now his company was considering hiring the firm that had beaten him to it. The boardroom screen lit up with my company's name. Brighton and Associates. Professional logo. Impressive client list. Small but mighty. Specialization in regulatory compliance and strategic transformation. Gerald stared at the screen. Didn't recognize it initially. Why would he? He'd never asked what I did outside work. Never cared about my professional development beyond how it served him. Blake was there too. Something about the presentation bothered him, but he couldn't place it. "Who runs this firm?" Gerald asked. The board member pulled up the bio. Founder and CEO is Claire Brighton. 15 years of experience in strategic consulting. Former director of strategy at. He paused, reading. "At this firm." The room went very quiet. "Claire." Gerald's voice was strained. "Our Claire." "Former Claire," the board member corrected. "She left 3 weeks ago." I kept my head down in my cubicle, but I could feel the shockwave from 3 floors away. Blake showed up at my desk that afternoon. His swagger was gone. He looked uncertain. "Claire, can we talk?" "Privately." We went to an empty conference room. He closed the door. You started a competing firm. A consulting firm. Not a competitor. Different business model. While you were working here. On my own time. Completely legal. I checked with 3 different lawyers. He studied me. The frameworks you were building. The research. Were you planning this the whole time? I was preparing for possibilities. When I saw how things were changing here, I made sure I had options. Does my father know? He's about to. Blake ran his hand through his hair. I'm in over my head, aren't I? It was the first honest thing he'd said to me. Yes. Will you help me? No. Why not? Because you didn't earn this position. Your father gave it to you. And neither of you bothered to consider what you were taking from me. Understood. You need to figure this out yourself. Blake went straight to Gerald. I knew because 30 minutes later, I was summoned to the VP's office. Gerald was furious. You started a competing firm while working for me? A consulting firm. On my own time. Breaking no employment contracts. You stole clients. I haven't approached a single client of this company. Everything I've done has been completely independent. Blake says you refused to help him. Blake isn't my supervisor. I'm an intern coordinator. Helping directors isn't in my job description. His face turned red. Your job description is whatever I say it is. No, my job description is what's in the contract I signed, which I've fulfilled to the letter. You're being insubordinate. I'm being accurate. He leaned forward. Let me be clear, Claire. You are replaceable. You always have been. This little consulting firm of yours. It'll fail. Because you're not as valuable as you think you are. Understood. Pulled an envelope from my bag. Then you won't mind this. I handed him my resignation. Effective immediately. My resignation hit the company like a second bomb. Projects stalled instantly. Client questions that nobody else could answer piled up. The team that had worked under me was lost without direction. Blake froze completely. Couldn't make decisions. Couldn't answer questions. Couldn't even figure out where key documents were stored. 3 days after I left, Meridian Holdings pulled their contract. Cited strategic misalignment and lack of qualified leadership. 2 other major clients followed within the week. The board called an emergency session. Gerald tried to spin it as temporary adjustment pains. Insisted Blake just needed time to settle in. But the numbers told a different story. Revenue projections were down 18%. Client confidence was plummeting. The regulatory compliance issue still wasn't resolved. We need help, the board chair said bluntly. We need it now. Gerald had no choice. Contact Brighton and Associates. See if they're available for an emergency consultation. Blake looked sick. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The request came through official channels. A formal invitation to consult. Emergency rates. Immediate start date. I read the email twice. Let them wait 24 hours before responding. Brighton and Associates would be pleased to discuss a potential engagement. Please schedule a meeting with a full board present. We'll need complete transparency about the current situation before determining if we're the right fit. Translation. I wasn't walking into this blind, and I wasn't dealing with Gerald alone. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Conference room A, the biggest one. Full board attendance. Gerald would be there. Blake would be there. And I would be there. But not as their demoted intern. As the CEO of the firm they desperately needed. I walked into that building one last time. But everything was different. Security buzzed me in as a guest. Gave me a visitor badge. No more employee access. I was wearing a suit I'd bought specifically for client meetings. Professional. Confident. Expensive. My former co-workers stared as I walked past. I nodded politely but didn't stop to chat. The conference room was already full when I arrived. 7 board members. Gerald at one end. Blake beside him. My former team scattered throughout. I took the seat at the head of the table. The seat Blake had taken from me 6 weeks ago. Gerald's face drained of color. "Good morning," I said calmly. "I'm Claire Brighton, CEO of Brighton & Associates. Thank you for inviting us to consult on your strategic challenges." I opened my laptop, pulled up the presentation I'd prepared. 70 slides, every one backed by data. "Let's start with an honest assessment of your current situation," I began. For the next hour I walked through their problems. Not with malice, not with anger, just with facts. Failed client retention, dropped revenue, regulatory compliance gaps, leadership inexperience, strategic misalignment. I showed them exactly where Blake's changes had damaged relationships I'd spent years building, exactly how much money they'd lost, exactly what regulatory penalties they were facing. Gerald tried to interrupt. The board chair shut him down. When I finished, the room was silent. "Do you have solutions?" the chair asked. "I do. But before we discuss terms, I need you to understand something. I've already signed an exclusive partnership with Harman Strategic Partners." Gerald's head snapped up. "Harman? They approached me 3 weeks ago. Heard about my work through industry contacts. We've signed a 5-year strategic partnership agreement. You're working with our biggest competitor. I'm working with a company that values expertise. Whether that makes them your competitor is your choice." I laid out the terms. Clear, professional, non-negotiable. I'll consult on regulatory compliance and strategic realignment. 6-month engagement. Market rate fees. Complete autonomy in my recommendations. No interference from current leadership. "That's expensive," one board member said. "It's fair market rate for emergency consulting. If you'd rather hire someone else, I can provide referrals." Could. But we all knew there weren't many consultants who understood their specific situation as intimately as I did. "And Blake?" Gerald asked tightly. "Blake needs to step back from client-facing work until he's properly trained. I recommend reassigning him to operations. He can learn the business from the ground up. If he's serious about leadership, he'll earn it." Blake's face was red. But he didn't argue. Couldn't argue. The evidence of his failures was too obvious. "And if we agree to these terms?" the board chair asked. "Then I'll start Monday. I'll have your regulatory compliance resolved in 6 weeks. Client relationships stabilized in 3 months. Strategic realignment complete in 6 months. How can you be so certain?" "Because I built this company's strategy department from nothing. I know every client relationship personally. I know every system, every process, every gap. Can fix this. But only if you let me do it my way." The board looked at Gerald. Waited for his response. He sat there, jaw clenched. Crap. If he agreed, he admitted his son had failed. If he refused, the company would keep bleeding clients and money. "I think we should discuss this privately," he finally said. "Of course," I replied. "I'll wait outside." I sat in the lobby for 40 minutes. Drank terrible coffee. Answered emails on my phone. When they called me back in, the board chair spoke. "We'd like to engage Brighton & Associates under the terms you proposed. We'll have contracts ready by end of day." "Excellent. I'll need complete access to current client files, financial records, and operational procedures. I'll also need a dedicated workspace." "Your old office is available," the chair said. Gerald's face twitched. Blake looked like he might be sick. "That will work," I said calmly. The board didn't stop at hiring me. They launched an internal review. Gerald's decisions over the past year were scrutinized. The nepotism, the questionable personnel moves, the ignored warnings about regulatory changes. Blake was quietly moved out of the director position, reassigned to operations with a title that meant nothing, given busy work that kept him away from clients. Gerald fought it, argued, made threats. But the board had the power. And they'd seen enough. "This isn't about your son's potential," the chair told Gerald in a meeting I heard about later. "It's about putting people in positions they've earned." Claire earned director. She earned respect. Your son earned nothing. Gerald requested a private conversation with me. Left a message with my assistant. I made him wait 3 days before agreeing to meet. We met at a coffee shop near the office. Neutral ground. Public enough that he couldn't make a scene. He looked older. Tired. The smugness was completely gone. I owe you an apology, he started. You do. I was trying to help my son. Thought I could give him a head start. By stealing what I built. By humiliating me publicly. By assuming I'd just accept it. He was quiet. I underestimated you. You disrespected me. There's a difference. Can we fix this? Fix what? You can't give me back the position you took. Can't undo the humiliation. Can't restore the relationships you damaged. I can apologize. Publicly. I don't need your apology. I needed your respect. Past tense. Claire. Gerald, I'm here as a consultant because the board hired me. Not because I forgive you. Not because we're fixing anything. I'm here because I'm good at what I do and your company needs help. That's it. He looked defeated. For the first time I saw him as just a man. Not a villain. Not an obstacle. Just someone who'd made terrible choices and was finally facing consequences. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I believe you. But it doesn't change anything. 2 weeks later, the board announced Gerald's early retirement. Effective in 60 days. A face-saving exit disguised as a planned transition. But everyone knew the truth. His reputation was damaged beyond repair. The nepotism. The mismanagement. The loss of key clients under his leadership. He'd built a career on respect he hadn't earned. On authority given, not won. And when tested, it crumbled. Blake quietly left the company a month later. Took a job at a smaller firm. Entry-level position. Actually having to prove himself this time. I heard later that he apologized to several people. Admitted he'd been in over his head. Said the experience had humbled him. Maybe it had. Maybe he'd learn. But that wasn't my concern anymore. The company's survival was still uncertain. But my contract was providing stability. Clients were slowly returning. Regulatory compliance was being resolved. The strategic foundation I'd built was being restored. 6 months after signing the consulting contract, my firm secured something bigger. Harman Strategic Partners wanted to expand their partnership. Wanted Brighton and Associates to be their exclusive strategic consulting arm. The contract was massive. Multi-year. 8 figures. It made me the single largest business partner my former employer had. Not their employee. Not their intern. Their biggest external consultant. The irony was almost too perfect. I stood in my old office, now my consultant office, looking at the view I'd earned, the awards on my shelf, the projects I'd saved, the team I'd rebuilt. A knock at the door. One of the board members. Claire wanted to give you an update. Our client retention is back to 92%. Revenue projections are stable. Regulatory compliance is complete. The board wants to discuss a longer-term relationship with your firm. I'm listening. We'd like Brighton and Associates to be our permanent strategic consulting partner. Retainer arrangement. You'd have complete autonomy but ongoing collaboration. Thought about it. About what I'd almost lost. About what I'd built instead. Send me a proposal. I'll review it. Months later, I drove past the old building. Saw the new leadership team through the windows. Saw the changes I'd helped implement taking root. I didn't stop. Didn't go inside. Didn't need to anymore. One. Not through revenge. Not through destruction. But through building something that couldn't be taken away. They tried to make me small. To reduce me to an intern. To erase 15 years of expertise and accomplishment. Instead, they'd freed me to build something bigger. Something mine. Something that proved my value beyond any title they could give or take. Brighton and Associates was growing. More clients. More consultants. More proof that respect is earned through competence, not inherited through privilege. Gerald was retired. Blake was learning humility somewhere else. And I was building the career I'd always deserved. They thought demoting me would break me. Instead, they broke themselves trying. Because here's the truth they never understood. Titles can be taken away. But expertise, that's forever. And the moment you stop depending on their approval is the moment you become unstoppable. I built my own table, set my own terms, earned my own respect. And that's a victory they can never take away.